G'mahuladilu. Thanks very much for coming along. Um, as Andrew said, I'm Ben. I work for Historic Environment Scotland as research manager, and I'm hopefully going to give you a kind of broad brush overview of the current state of play of tourism in the Highlands, where heritage connects to that, some of the opportunities and challenges that we've been experiencing, and maybe a broad brush point to the future where I think we might be going. I'm going to try and leave some of the more detailed specifics to Stuart and Julian. So I'll try to not give you too much detail. And I apologize in advance if any of these slides are a bit messy. They are a bit text heavy in places. So as I said, do apologize if there's any issues with accessibility there. So really, I've talked you through some slides in generic terms. Apologies to anybody that knows this already. But from Visit Scotland, you can see here that just under 12.4 million people visited the Highlands in 2019. And that was the last kind of time we've really done a region-wide survey. Obviously, with the COVID-19 pandemic, things are very much in flux, as an understatement. But it gives you a sense here. A lot of people coming to our region and spending a lot of money. And in particular, you'll see they're supporting a lot of jobs and bringing a lot of money to the Highland economy. So tourism, I mean, will be no doubt familiar to most of you, is a big deal for us in the Highlands. I think as well, what the main message for you really is that heritage tourism is already an incredibly successful and strong part of the tourism offer of the Highlands, and indeed islands more widely. And this is, as I said, one of my denser text-heavy slides, so apologies for that. But this is reaching back a little while now. Again, statistics drawn from Visit Scotland's website. But 55% of the visitors to the Highlands in 2015 to 16 came for the history and culture. I don't expect that will have changed very much. And in terms of motivations for coming, you'll see here heritage is the third most popular motivation. It will be completely unsurprising to anybody to hear that number one is the scenery and landscape. I think two is a place that people have always wanted to come. So in general, history culture is a very strong reason for people to come. And as you'll see here, 33% of visitors to Scotland list history and culture as a reason for coming. So for us in the Highlands, it's a unique selling point, our history, culture, our heritage. And again, I chucked in this as well because the reason people say that they're coming and what they actually do when they're here are two different things. But again, here you'll see very much borne out that heritage is a really strong component of what people do when they're actually here. So that's 2/3 of people visited historic house, stately home or castle, and half of people visited a historic religious building. And when you consider the fact there that general sightseeing is people's most popular activity, and I don't see any reason why sightseeing doesn't include archaeological sites, castles from afar, other elements of the historic environment, townscapes, villages, heritage is a very strong component of what people do. And again, just to give you that sense that for the Highlands compared to Scotland as a whole, more people do heritage related activities when they're here than across Scotland at a general level. So again, strong message there that heritage is already a really strong part of what it is to be a Highland tourism business or what it means to be impacted by tourism. And again, I just thought this is a bit of a fuzzy screen grab, I'm afraid, but the top 5 paid for visitor attractions in the Highlands, 4 of them are heritage sites. This just gives you a sense of the numbers of people coming to paid for visitor attractions, and then roughly how many of those are heritage. And I mean, you could argue the case even that Jacobite cruises on Loch Ness have a very strong heritage angle with Urquhart Castle there. Whether or not you see Nessie as heritage, I don't know. But again, just gives you that sense that lots of people are coming, lots of people are paying money already for heritage experiences and offers. But as again, many of you will be aware, for the record, I live in Gairloch in Westeros, so we have our own opportunities and challenges around tourism here. But I picked out a few photos and headlines in terms of the challenges that tourism is bringing to our region. I don't think any of this will need introduction to you, but it ranges from overcrowding and over-tourism to behaviour, and then also the knock-on effects of popularity in terms of house prices, access to accommodation and to infrastructure. And in the top right there, get that sense that as much as this might be harming local communities, this itself can impact the tourism offer itself, where places are seen to be at capacity or over capacity, limiting the visitor experience. And I think as well, just in terms of trying to reflect on the impact of the pandemic, and that's quite hard because at the moment, obviously, everything is still very much in play. We don't quite know how things are playing out. We know directions of travel. But broadly speaking, what I've tried to do on, again, a very messy slide, I think one of the pre-pandemic trends was actually for an expansion in some respects of what you might kind of call collective visitor experiences. So coach tour parties, cruise ships, experiences where people were part of a wider group of people exploring, visiting a region. And that very much, for very obvious reasons, I think has been hindered and harmed by the pandemic. It's not to say it has its own environmental and economic impacts. There are issues and challenges there, but that's very much being played down just now by the pandemic. And on the left, very much a rise in what you might call individual tourism experiences. So rather than people being part of groups using shared forms of transport, we've seen very much an acceleration of a trend towards individual journeys in very small groups, camper vans, motorhomes, wild camping, and also the rise of the Airbnb infrastructure and industry. And then kind of, it's not quite in the middle there because the slide is messy, but throwing in here as well, the rise of online engagement with both kind of arts and culture organizations and offers more widely, but also in terms of tourism visits and offers, that online and digital is now a much stronger component even than it was in 2019, and that's something to think about in terms of how we are marketing ourselves, how we're engaging audiences, and what kinds of experiences visitors are getting and looking for when they're here. So I think in terms of that's the challenge, what might the solutions be? And really here I've teased out kind of a few, they're not quite theoretical approaches, but kind of buzz phrases, buzzwords for ways in which people, organizations, groups are starting to think about solutions to these issues. And you get a sense that they're all a bit wordy, but in and around the same kinds of themes: sustainable tourism, responsible tourism, regenerative, restorative tourism. There are many more. But I thought I'd just kind of run you through very quickly what these kind of concepts mean, because I think they're going to be increasingly part of the discourse and the conversations around the future of the region. So again, with apologies for a bit of a wordy set of slides, really this is kind of UNESCO or UN speak in many respects, but sustainable tourism really being about understanding not just the economic benefits that tourism can produce, but the social and environmental impacts it can lead to, the impacts it can have on host communities and the environment, and how they are balanced and taken into account with the needs of creating jobs, wealth, economic benefits in a local area. Responsible tourism, a bit simpler, really. It's, well, the clue's in the name. It's having more kind of responsibility in our offers, more heed to the needs, the interests of local people, local places, and then environmental and other factors surrounding that. And finally, I think regenerative and restorative tourism it's not quite got the legacy, I guess, and the depth behind it just now that the other two concepts have, but I think they're quite interesting and exciting concepts, generally about the ways that we can harness things like tourism to leave places better off as a result of an impact, and really thinking through how tourists can not just kind of, as it were, transactionally take an offer from somewhere in exchange for money, but very much the experiences that they have give back to a local place, whether that's in terms of things like tree planting, or whether that's in terms of things like engaging with traditional crafts, skills, kind of primary extraction, food and drink, and that what that can do for a local place. So I think that's something that we'll hear more of, because it ties into pre-pandemic trends in terms of people wanting what they call the experiential economy. So people wanting experiences when they're on holiday, unique, authentic experiences of place that they can kind of share online through social media, but also look back on fondly in terms of getting to know somewhere. So I think that's one to bear in mind as we go forward. Generally, what I've tried to do here is pull out some general principles for you. So again, across the piece, regardless of what exactly we call these latest buzzwords or these trends, really it's about better protecting and promoting assets, realizing that environmental factors are integrally linked to wealth creation, but also to culture and to social forces as well. Obviously, and very definitely, having to move towards a low carbon visitor experience. I think the sustainable word will stay with us, and you'll see there in terms of active travel, better ways of adopting circular economy principles, but also thinking through in terms of what are our retail offers, what food and drink do we sell, how much plastic do we use at our shops. All things like that, I think, are going to be a significant concern and a significant trend in terms of our engagement with tourism over the next few years. And obviously, I think the last one, understanding residents, people that live in a region, their needs, their interests. I think there's a general consensus that sometimes those interests have been overlooked. So as I said, I don't want to dwell too much on examples, because I'm kind of leaving those to Julian and Stuart to develop further for you. But I've just got a few that kind of point the way, I think, to interesting models that we're seeing, not all in the Highlands, but experiences that we can learn from. Some of which are drawn from my experiences at Historic Environment Scotland and our work, others that I think are interesting or good models being done by others, and I'm kind of celebrating them, sharing them with you today. So Doon Castle, Doon is a great example of a heritage asset that became very, very popular as a result of, I think, particularly appearing in film and TV shows. It's relatively close to Stirling, for anybody that doesn't know Doon Village itself, and that led to a massive influx of visitors over the last few years, and an infrastructure that wasn't quite capable of coping with that. And I think there was a real sense locally, for local people, that there was lots of people coming to Doon Castle, but the benefits and the benefits weren't being felt in the village and in the local area, and the impacts were impacting on people's experiences and quality of life at the local level. And really, I think the solution that is being adopted, so that it's not a finished product by any means here, but is a campus approach that's very much thinking about the heritage asset, in this case a castle, in its wider place and its connectedness to the village and the local area, and really thinking about investment not necessarily in the castle itself, but in the infrastructure and the services that support it. So in this case, you'll see here really investments in transport to allow people to travel there in more responsible, more environmentally friendly ways. Access, so paths linking the or better paths linking the castle to the village, and then landscaping again to ensure that lots of footfall isn't having undue effects on wildlife and on the plants and animals living locally. Another example, and this is apologies again, a terrible screen grab, but the Catherine Ecking Museum, for anybody that knows the group working in kind of eastern Perthshire around Alyth up towards Glenshee. And I think this is really a great example of a newish initiative that have really adopted the regenerative tourism approach, very much looking to promote sustainable and active travel and to give visitors, or make it easy for visitors to contribute and give back to local places and communities. So although this isn't a particularly good image, if you can make it out, what you'll see is very much one example of a way that they promote active and sustainable travel. So this is a mountain biking route, gives you examples of the Scottish Outdoors Access Code, the types of terrain, how people can get there, how they can move around. And there's a series of wonderful experiences and wonderful adventure trails that you can explore that are all made accessible to people. And I think we'll see a lot more from the Ecking Museum over the next few years. At Dundonald Castle, again, don't want to dwell too much, but this is another Historic Environment Scotland example. And the big takeaway here is very much that this is really run in partnership with the Friends of Dundonald Castle, a local community group. And the Friends run, own and manage a cafe and visitor centre. and very much the value that we've seen from that approach is that the castle sits in an area of relative deprivation, and the visitor centre and the cafe has really become a hub for the local community for events, for outreach, for engagement. And I think it's showing the benefit of a public body working in partnership with social enterprises and community groups at the local level. So again, less so much about the heritage assets itself as the way that either the asset is used in partnership with a local community, or a public body works in partnership with that group. And finally, again, others, I think we might hear a little bit from Julian about this kind of project, so I don't want to dwell too much on, but I think we're seeing really exciting initiatives, shielding project it's true, in the Highlands in particular, but I think the Crannog Centre in Loch Tay, although obviously I think many people on this call will know the Crannog itself has tragically burned down, but the Crannog Centre itself is rebounding very strongly, a very resilient group with really exciting plans to move across the loch and to rebuild. But I think that the headlines from both of these organizations, and there are many more, is that these are organizations about engaging people directly with heritage and with the practices, the skills, the experiences, the knowledge that come with that. So in the Shielding Project's case, there's a lot of education and learning and outreach with local schools, but there are visitor experiences. People can pay to come and stay in these wonderful rebuilt bothies. Similar for the Crannog Centre, very much based around apprenticeships, using craft skills and engaging people directly with forms of heritage. So whether that's kind of traditional spinning, dyeing, food and craft production, there's a fantastic offer there now in terms of getting hands-on with heritage. And I think this is part of that, as I said, the experiential economy moving forward. I think in particular, the Shielding Project is based around archaeology, the Crannog Centre, again, experimental archaeology, so that it's really pointing the opportunities for archaeology out there. And I'm hoping we'll hear a bit more from the others about this. So because I'm hoping that the others will speak a bit more about kind of community initiatives, particularly, I thought in kind of closing, I would just dwell a little bit on the role of public bodies such as Historic Environment Scotland or others in terms of what we can bring to the region, what we should be bringing. And obviously, I don't have all the answers, and people on the call will have their own thoughts. But I wanted to highlight two examples that I thought are very positive in terms of the direction of travel. You know, I'm sure people on the call will have their own perspectives on the level to which these projects have delivered at local levels, some of the intricacies, the ins and outs of delivering them. But I think Nature Scott's Natural and Cultural Heritage Fund in particular has been a great example of the way that a public body can think ambitiously, creatively, and try to deliver much needed infrastructure investment in a region. I think what's really sad about this case, as you'll see, if you can make it out in the slide there, this was about accessing the EU structural infrastructure funds, and that's obviously a route now that's no longer available to us. So it remains to be seen exactly what replacement we'll get and whether that can deliver this kinds of benefit. But I think it's great to see a public body kind of footing the risk, working in partnership to identify opportunities to start resourcing. And again, I appreciate that there are lots of issues that we're facing across the region. This covers many of the main ones, but there are many others that still are to be addressed. And I think again, on the right hand side here, not a good slide, but hopefully at least the headline, you'll have seen this. It's Cairngorm National Park, and I think recently a couple of the big news stories coming out of the CMPA have been incredibly inspiring. Seeing what you can do when you think ambitiously, you think big, and you work in partnership. And it's the way that I think public bodies like the CMPA can start to think about being the fulcrum, being the anchor for bringing these projects together, using project management experience, using local relationships to leverage in funding on behalf of others. So I'm really looking forward to seeing how the Heritage Horizon Award develops and how it plays out. But I think it's hopefully the first of many. And I think across both of these examples, there is a good kind of level of ambition that we should be thinking about, where we identify projects for archaeology and for heritage more widely. How can we think ambitiously, work in partnership, join stuff up to really unlock benefit? And so finally, again, with apologies that this is quite public sector or public body focused, I think what we're starting to see within the kind of the public sector is this focus on what's called community wealth building. You might have heard this is a kind of big growth area for the Scottish government just now, thinking through how public bodies can use their influence, use their spending power to really drive local outcomes. There's been pilots underway in Ayrshire, in the Western Isles, and I think perhaps in Fife as well in Scotland, and a couple of really good examples through local authorities in England. But generally speaking, there are 5 principles to community wealth building, and you'll see it's really about diversifying who owns income generator, wealth creating assets. How do we use financial power to create benefits for local places? That includes things like procurements, how we buy goods and services, who we buy them from, the wages that we pay, the conditions that we give to workers, and then making kind of good use of land and assets. And I think in general, I think just to consider the narrative that I've given you in terms of some of the ways that we need to start working in partnership, the ways that we need to think about what heritage produces. We're already producing good stuff, but I think we can think more constructively, more ambitiously about the benefits that our heritage produces for local communities and for our region. And so really, I think community wealth building, it's a latest buzz phrase. None of this is necessarily new concepts, but it's a good opportunity to start joining up and to think ambitiously and to think in that kind of joined up partnership manner. So really kind of by way of closing, I thought I'd use this as a chance to kind of pose some questions for us. And I think, this is a limited group of selection of questions, but who does own our heritage? If you can even, in many respects, talk about ownership, certainly there's a moral ownership as well as a legal ownership. But who owns our heritage? Who benefits from it? How do people benefit? How are the assets that we've got run or managed, and how might we better run those, manage them to derive more benefits? I think particularly for local communities, because it's very much that localism focus that's coming out of a lot of this kind of approach. But I think in terms of how can we engage local communities more with our heritage, with the ownership, the management, the running, the promotion of things, because that, if we can do that, we will derive, I think, more benefits across the region. Benefits will be created more locally and more sustainably. So I think really it's a kind of whirlwind tour of the state of play of where we are. But I think, as I said, we're in a relatively good place. I think now the opportunity is really thinking about how can we be more ambitious? As I said, how can we join up? But there are some, fundamentally quite challenging questions here. Who owns our heritage? Who benefits? Who manages? What are the skills necessary to take on and run heritage to deliver those benefits? I think we in the Highlands at least have a really fantastic now group of people, a group of community landowners in particular, but community asset owners as well, that have learned and demonstrated the power of community ownership. So I think that's certainly something that we can build on. And I'd like to think that over the next few years, you'll see more partnerships between public bodies such as Historic Environment Scotland and community groups, whether they are community owners or more generally charitable bodies or social enterprises. So I hope that was interesting as a canter through the state of play. And I don't know about you, I'm very much looking forward to hopefully hearing a bit more about some details from my other 2 panelists. Thank you.